Hey guys, welcome back. I'm going to be showing you how to programmatically through the Feathers API and client application to create a recipe. So we would like to create a recipe form for our client so we can add recipes to the server without using Postman. So if we're in our client folder, we're going to go to source, we're going to add a new component, add recipe.js. So this is going to be our form. Now, in the form, we're just going to import our usual stuff for React components. Component from React. And then we're going to be using a button, form, and a message from Semantic UI. And we're also going to use browser history. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to use browser history in Saga instead. So let's create our class. Add recipe. Extends component. And super props. This dot state. So we basically want to create a state that our form. This is kind of like a local state. We could also put this in Redux, but and create actions, but it's a lot more boilerplate, and this is only needed in this particular. So it's easier to set up just a local state for it to kind of keep the form. So we're gonna have the name of the recipe. We're gonna have ingredients, which we're gonna take in as a string and then turn into an array. And then the description is also. And then we also want an image, but we're not gonna keep that in the. We're not gonna give it a default value in the state. Oh, you know what? I didn't make the constructor. My bad, guys. So constructor props and just put that inside there. There we go. Okay, so this is our constructor. Let's make sure this is all lined up. Cool. So we're just setting a default state in there. And let's make sure this is lined up good. Alright, awesome. So next thing you want to do is do our render function. So, like I said, we're going to be using a form. And then when we submit, we'll handle that. So we'll create a handle submit function. And then we won't worry about errors for now. But there's a way to, in the form, show red lines and stuff if you get errors. So create a label, recipe name, and then we'll get an input. And the value is going to be this dot state dot name, and then on change, set the name also to name, and then on change, we're going to just create a function. What that function is going to do is every time on change is called when someone inputs a character into the input box. So when they do that, we just want to update the state. So this dot set state, and we just want to add update name with whatever they just typed in, which is e.target.value. And we can set a placeholder, which can just say recipe name. And then we can just close it off. We also need to wrap this in a form field. And then we're going to do the same for create an image, a description, and ingredients. So the next one is going to be recipe image, and we're going to do a different type of input. We're not going to use value. We need to set the type equal to an upload, excuse me, not an upload of file, so that way we get, instead of a text box, we get a little thing where we can upload. So, and then we want to call this ingredients, and then we can't just update the state like this. We're going to create actually a function that will handle that. So we'll create a function called handle image change in a second, and we get rid of the placeholder. Okay, now ingredients, we can just say put 1 per line, and we can split per line to break it up into an array. And then the value is now going to be ingredients. We also want to take the name to ingredients, and then instead of name, ingredients, and placeholder, ingredients. Okay, last field, description. So change that to description, 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 and also description. Okay, now if we create some dummy classes, or functions I mean, the first being handle image change and handle submit. I think we can go look at our form and see what it looks like. But first, we need to actually put this on the page. Right now, we're actually not rendering it in the React router. We're just made the component. So let's actually put this on its own page. So let's create a, not creating anything. Let's actually go into source, and we're gonna create the index page, and we're just gonna add a route right here. So instead of the index route, this is just gonna be a regular route with the path, let's say recipes add, and then the component it will use is gonna be an add recipe component, which we just created, and we need to import that. So add recipe. Oops. Now if we refresh that and go to the page, oops, we made a little bit of a mistake. If we go back to our components, and then we go to add recipe, that needs to be a colon. Oops. Okay. Now if it refreshes, compiles okay. Now if we go to recipes.add, oh, looks like we're having a problem. Let's double check what our error is. So we cannot invalid prop component supplied to route. So let's go to their route and make sure we set that one up okay. So yeah, the component add recipe. Oh, we forgot to export add recipe. That's what it was. So if we go back to our add recipe, we can export default add recipe. Now if we refresh the page, nice. We can see our form. And it looks like I forgot a submit button. So let's add that in there right now. Let's put that at the very bottom. Create a button. type equals submit. Submit. Nice. Let's refresh the page. And now type in recipe name. We can go search for an image. Very cool. Oh, and you know what? These should not be input fields. I want these to be text areas. So let's put text area. And same for this guy as well. Now let's refresh. Awesome. So now like this can be carrots, tomatoes, and so on. They can create one per line. And what we'll do is when we do in our on submit, we will actually handle this text and split it by the new line. So if we hit submit, nothing will happen. Well, it'll happen, but it won't do anything. It'll just refresh the page. So let's actually do stuff in our handle image change and I'll handle submit. So let's start with the image. So for that, we're just going to first prevent the default behavior because we're going to want to do our own thing. We're going to create a reader. Okay. Okay, get the file. So files 0. Oh, and we also need to pass in E here. Get the first one, and then we're just going to read the file. And create a function, and then we're just going to set the state whenever they upload the file. So we're going to get a file is equal to file, and then the image preview URL. Oops. Is equal to reader dot result. And then let's go ahead and read it. So read as data URL. Okay, so what's going to happen is whenever they upload an image, it's going to go read the image and save it to the state. So then we have a preview URL, which we can then add to, which we can use to pass into our database or call the API. I believe this will be a base 64 encoding of the image. So we'll see this a little bit later in action. But basically all you need to know about this function is it's putting the image inside the state. Now let's handle when we're submitting. So let's first do a little bit of cleanup. So let's get the recipe name from the state and let's trim it to get rid of the white space excess. And then let's also go ahead and add the recipe. So we don't have this function right now, but we're going to add it into our actions. So remember how we had a, I'll show you real quick. We had a recent recipes. Well, we're also going to have a, so go to your actions folder in your action creators, and we're going to add a new action. So we're going to create this add recipe one. So add recipe. And it's going to take a couple parameters for the name of the recipe, the description, the ingredients, and the image URL. And it's going to return these things. So type and name and description and ingredients and image URL. And now we'll pass them in here, name, get the state of the image, Oh, before I do that, fill in the type, of course. Add recipe requested. And what we'll be next making a saga to actually pass this to the API. So we'll pass in the name, description, ingredients, and image URL to the API to make an API call to our server. So the name, and now we want to get the description. So description, and then the ingredients, which will be this.state.ingredients. And now this is a string, but we'd like to have it an array for each ingredient. So we're going to split by the new line, and then we're going to get the image preview. So this.state.image preview URL. Okay, awesome. So what's going to happen is when they click on the submit button, it will call this function, passing in the parameters that they had in the form, and that form will dispatch this action right here. Now let's actually do something and add this to the server in the back end. But before we do that, actually, let's prevent default, because we don't want the page to refresh. Okay, so we're done with that. So we have our action being dispatched. We now want to go to our saga and actually make an API call. So if we open up our sagas, we're going to create a new set of these guys. So we can copy those, paste that. And now we're going to add recipe. This one will be add recipe saga. And then we're also going to fork it, add recipe saga. And now instead of looking for recent recipes, we're looking for add recipe requested, and this is the same name we used in our action. So requested, and instead we're going to call add recipe. And now our add recipe is just going to catch the response from the call that we're going to make. We're going to call add recipe. Actually, let's call it create recipe. Pass in the Feathers app. Then we're going to also pass in all the parameters. So we're going to also need the action. So action.name, action.description, action.ingredients, and action.image URL. Okay, so it passes all this to a function called createRecipe, which we need to add to our API. So let's put that down here. So let's add a new one, createRecipe. We're going to have to go into there next and add this to services API, a createRecipe one. And so we're just going to call that function, passing in the name, description, ingredients. And then we're going to look for the response. And once we get a response, we'll send a add. Actually, for this one, we don't even need to dispatch another thing. We're pretty much just done. We're just going to go ahead and after they've successfully, we're assuming it's going to be successful. We are doing no error checking right now, but we should. And we should be doing error checking, but we'll add that in later. So right now we're just going to, after they're done submitting the form, take them to the home page. So if we use this browser history, and we can push on to which location we want to go, the home, which is just an empty string. Okay, awesome. So what's going to happen is it's going to call the API. And then whenever it's done being called, we're going to go to the login page. And this create recipe is going to handle adding it to the backend, to the database, to our Feathers server. So let's go ahead and make this create recipe function. So it's going to be in our services API. So we said export function create recipe, and we'll get the app. And then we don't need just the app, because remember, we also are passing other parameters: the name, the description, the ingredients, and the image URL. So we're just going to make a post request to the recipes. First, we're going to do the same thing we did above, create a service to recipes. And then we're just going to create one. And we want to actually return that. Or, you know what, we don't even need to return, this function doesn't, well, we're returning the response, why don't we actually print that out too? So if you go back to the saga real quick, let's also just log console.log the response, so we know what's happening. So we'll go ahead and return once we create. So create, pass in the name, description, ingredients, image URL, and then .then, and then data, error. We're just going to print out the data, and that's it. Okay, so once we make that action call in our form, it's going to call our saga, and then our saga is going to call this function right here, and this function is going to post to the server, and it's going to add this to the database, and then we're going to go back to the home page, and we're going to see our recipe added. So hopefully we didn't miss any steps, and this works smoothly. Let's give it a test. So we're just going to refresh the page, get rid of that junk in the URL. Okay, it looks like there's no problem so far, and let's actually keep inspect open and preserve the log. That way we can see the response that we get. So this is going to be a test recipe. Let's just add an image that I have, this little Timo. This is say carrots. Oh, looks like we're getting a set state is undefined. Let's double check. Looks like we might have messed something up there. So let's go back to our components, and then that's an add recipe. So we did this. Oh, something I forgot to mention is we have to give both these functions the ability to use this. Right now this is undefined because this is only defined in constructor and render, and so it's not defined in either of these two, so we have to add them. So we say this dot handle image change is equal to this dot handle image change dot bind this, and that adds it to it. And we also need to do that for handle submit. So adding these two lines right here allows these two functions to have this. So saving that, we can refresh the page, and we can try this again. And why don't we refresh so it cleans the log too. Okay, so test recipe. Oops. Test recipe. Now we can add the Timo. This will be carrots, tomato, onion, cook everything in one pot. Okay, let's submit this. We submit it, and it looks like we are getting an internal error when we post this to recipes. So our entity is too large. So now what's happening is we're sending a really big image over to the server, because when we upload this image right here, it's too big for the server to handle, so it doesn't like that. So all we have to do is we need to go to our backend and update the configuration file, and just tell it we want to allow bigger files. So if we go back to our backend, and you go into source, and then your app, you just come down here, and right where you see bodyparser.json, you're just going to say limit 50 megabytes. And that's it. Restart the server. And now if we submit this, and we need to refresh because that, let's do it like that. Okay. So test recipe. Now what should happen is it should accept our post requests just okay now, because it's able to handle the big image. So onion, carrots, tomato. Description is cook everything in one pot. Okay, so let's submit that and take a look. Our test recipe is here. Now this is the response it gave us, so it just tells us this stuff. And if we go to our React dev tool, we can go to the recipe list, and we can see our first recipe has an ID, created at, description, image URL, ingredients, and a name. And it actually has an image URL that will actually work. So what we can do is we can go back to our component, our recipe card, and add in the description and image, and we should see it show up for this test recipe. So if we go back to client and you open up components, recipe card, add back the image, image is equal to recipe.image URL, and then down here our description is equal to recipe.description, or because some of these don't have descriptions, no description. That way it doesn't error out at us and get mad. So now that's awesome. We see our TMO, we see our description, and we upload it all ourselves. So now we could go back, we could upload another one. We could upload as many as we like. That's working all nicely. The next thing I want to set up in the next video is being able to click on these cards and just showing like an individual view for each one. And then after that, getting into some authentication, a login, and a sign up page. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.